Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Digital Titans. This is your host Casey. Who does not want leads? Now that's a silly question to ask because everybody needs leads for their business, don't you think? Now, how about this? What do you know about your lead? Do you know where your lead resides? Do you know what your lead drinks first thing in the morning? Do you know what is your lead's favorite breakfast? Do you know how much your lead makes per month? Do you know what kind of a house he lives in? Do you know what kind of a car he drives? If you knew these things about your lead, and if you apply this logic or if you apply these data points across the scope of your data that you have, and if you apply this on a scale, and if you're able to scale this data, don't you think you would be able to generate leads much more easily than doing it on a one-on-one basis? So if you ever had an experience approaching a bank for a loan, or if you know somebody who works for a bank, you would know that they follow certain activities which help them decide whether to issue a loan to somebody or not to issue a loan based upon their history. Now, a bank definitely looks at things like the history of the person, the banking history, how is his debt history, how is his repayment history, what is his lifestyle like, what is his demographics, what are his activities, what does his bank account look like, the statement of the accounts look like. Now, has he repaid the previous loans or dues? Now, looking at all these points, they come up with a model where anybody with these characteristics is considered as least risky to issue a loan, where if somebody had a lot of bounce checks and break in repayments, or they fail to make their monthly payments or installments or monthly installments, now this would result in a bad history where the bank would consider twice even before they think of giving you a loan. You look at certain characteristics and decide if it's a good trait or a bad trait for your lead to have. And if you apply this across a scale of the data that you have, this is so-called as lead scoring. Now, lead scoring is a concept where you apply certain data points to all the leads that you have, and having these traits would classify your lead to be a warm lead, or failure to possess such traits would mark your lead as a cold lead. Now, this concept where you start assigning scores to your leads based upon certain attributes that you define is called as lead scoring. Now, lead scoring in digital marketing is the process of assigning scores to your individual leads based upon certain parameters. Now, who defines these parameters? Of course, you. You define these parameters because you are the business owner and you know more about your leads than anybody else. Now, when it comes to lead scoring, it can be classified into a few models. There are a few models of lead scoring. Now, these models can be demographic, it can be your email engagement model, it can be social engagement patterns, it can be online behavior. Now, how do your leads behave on these platforms across these parameters? Now, if you start assigning scores to these activities, and the higher score, the better, the warmer the lead. And if you start focusing on people or leads or your audience or your target audience with these behaviors, that's when you would start looking at achieving ideal lead for you, right? Now, you may be wondering, now, don't you think that's a cumbersome process? Because I would have to start defining the activities, look at each lead that comes in, start assigning scores. Now, something is missing. Now, this is not how marketing is done in 2020, you may think. Now, that's exactly what I'm going to talk about, which is there is a beautiful marriage that happens between data and your lead scoring activity, where you define your activity, you define your scores of for each of these activities. And if you start applying this to a predictive model where machine learning kicks in and it starts looking at processing this data at scale and start giving you the ideal data that you need, now that's where the magic happens. Now, let me show you what I'm talking about, and before that, let me glance through the few things that I spoke to you about, and I think that should be a good place to start with. So let's jump onto my screen and let me show you. I've identified a few sites. I would also be giving credits to those websites, and let me show you what I'm exactly talking about. So let's hop in. Alright, so these are the different kinds of models that I spoke about. So one of them is a demographic lead model, where you start looking at demographic parameters for your leads. And then going forward is you have company information, where you classify or you talk to your leads about, or you assign scores based upon characteristics related to their companies they work with, their designations, etc., etc. Now, if you start looking at other activity, which is online behavior, how do they behave online? Are they comfortable giving out their email IDs? Are they comfortable giving out the credit card numbers? Do they indulge in spammy activities where they're just given some information which doesn't make any sense in terms of the first letters of their names not being capitalized, email ID is very vague, which is abc@gmail.com. It could be anything. Now you have those parameters, and if you identify those parameters, you start assigning scores accordingly. For example, let me give you an example. If you find a lead who is interested in your webinar, put in the information, you put in a valid email ID, and then you could probably bump his score by 5, let's say +5. Now, if you find a spammy lead where he just put an email ID which doesn't make any sense at all, so you may downgrade the score by, let's say, 3, right? So this is how you assign scores. And then you start tweaking in. This is not, now this is the disclaimer, this is not something where you plug in once and it's on autopilot. After that, you have to continuously tweak it. Though there is machine learning that kicks in and starts helping you with all these things, there has to be constant monitoring and tweaking for you to get to that place where you arrive at the optimum lead for you, right? Now let's scroll down and start looking at other things. You have email engagement. How is their email engagement patterns? So having a look at that definitely makes sense. And social engagement, how do they behave on social platforms? Do they engage with your social platforms? Do they engage with you on Instagram? Do they like it? Do they like your pages, not like your pages, etc., etc.? Now these are the different types of models when I speak about lead scoring models. Now along with that, let's also look at a few examples in terms of how could you identify certain parameters. So if I have to give let's say, now here are a few examples. Now if you're somebody who is looking at getting your lead scoring done for a school that's online, so this is exactly what I'm talking about. Now these may be the things that you're looking at. Is the valid contact information provided? Are they looking at information about the paid courses? Are they registering for your webinars? What is the time that they spend on webinars? Communication with the manager. If they provide their contact information, maybe you can bump their score up by 5 points. Let's say 5 points. Let's say if they register for your webinars, maybe you can bump it up by 2 points. Time spent, accordingly, if they spend no time at all, maybe you can reduce it by 1 point. Or if they engage actively with your webinars, maybe you can further add it by 1. So you can decide whatever you want, and then you can assign scores accordingly, because you know what activities work and what don't, right? Now this is just an example. Now there is another important thing that I want to talk to you about, which is called as predictive analysis. Now this predictive analysis is the answer that you're looking for about all of us were worried about, do I have to do it for individual leads one by one? Now that's not going to happen. That's exactly where predictive model comes in, and let me show you what I exactly mean by that, right? So hold on while I show you what that means. Now let's quickly jump in here and let me show you this. All right, now let's say you have a lead, right? And you have identified certain attributes of your lead. Now let's say A, B, C are the characteristics that I'm looking for in my ideal lead. Now if your ideal lead has these characteristics, now it's a good lead for you, right? Now your point is, if there are hundreds of people who are my leads, right? Now if I have to manually assign these things to each of these leads, it's going to be cumbersome, right? Now that's exactly where your predictive model kicks in. Now what predictive modeling does is it looks at the characteristics of these leads, right? Let's say a lead like this is a 95% score, and a lead like this is about, let's say, 70%, right? And then let's say another lead again is 95%, and then you have something which is about 70%. Now there is another lead which is 50%, right? Now this is what you have figured out based upon the scores that you have given in. Now predictive model, what that does is it completely looks at machine learning systems, and it applies it to the entire data at scale, where machine learning does everything at once for your data, right, for your data. Now all you have to do after that is just keep tweaking in any characteristics that you want. Now here you were looking at ABC. Maybe after 6 months during the life cycle of your customer, maybe a parameter called D also has to be looked at, right? Now maybe this is something where you would want to constantly tweak things, but this remains the same. So all your tweaks that you do gets applied to this predictive model, where it keeps on getting this activity done based upon machine learning systems, and that's when you will ensure a consistent flow of warm leads, where you don't have to do it one by one for individual leads, but it happens at scale, right? Now my further sessions will definitely talk more about lead scoring and lead scoring tools, about how you can start doing it yourself for your businesses. Now until then, I think this would serve to be a very good resource for a lead scoring 101 session. Any comments, feedback, please don't hesitate. I take them very seriously and work upon those things. Any other tool that you would want me to review, or anything else that you would want me to cover, please don't hesitate. Just put in the comments and I'll do that for you. Until then, this is Casey signing off, and ciao.